Today on CityCast DC, Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for DC, really wants to throw the book at the woman accused of vandalizing the World War II memorial. According to my guest, Josh Gerstein, it's one way for her to get back in the good graces of her boss. That would be Donald Trump. Josh is one of the best connected legal reporters in town, and he's here to put the national politics of the case in context and to explain what it might mean for DC, where, thanks to a weird accident of history, Trump's appointee is also responsible for prosecuting street crime. Today is Thursday, August 20th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, good to be with you.
Last week, a woman named Melissa Farris turned herself in for vandalizing the World War II memorial with foam and with graffiti. You wrote this really good piece in Politico about the U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, and her Herculean efforts to keep Melissa Farris locked up. This is pretty unusual for a vandalism case. A judge didn't buy it. But what was Pirro doing here?
Well, I mean, it seems like what she's doing is at bottom trying to get back in Trump's good graces. You know, I mean, she found herself in a somewhat similar case, really on the outs with Trump publicly for the first time I can remember since she took over this U.S. attorney job about a year ago. Obviously, I'm referring to the reflecting pool cases where her office had charged people with vandalizing the lining of the reflecting pool, which was a project that, you know, Trump had really personally taken interest in and ownership of, even at one point driving the presidential motorcade through the dry reflecting pool, and then later became outraged when he said, you know, liberals had come in and damaged it and vandalized it. And Pirro jumped on this, you know, very hot criminal case and found a few people to charge, including a former Olympian named David Hearn. And, you know, she pushed that case forward, spoke out about it publicly, put up social media posts about how terrible all this conduct was and that these people were going to be spending years in prison. And then within a matter of about 2 to 3 weeks, all those cases completely fizzled. She backed away from them and explained in great detail that the reflecting pool was so botched in its construction that it was the reconstruction or the renovation that it was going to be impossible to prosecute anybody for vandalism. And she even suggested she wasn't really sure if some of these people had actually vandalized anything. Maybe they saw something floating in the water and picked it up. And she dropped all the cases on a Friday and in the successive days. And this caused outrage from Trump, who went after her on social media and at some, you know, press availabilities with reporters in the White House at the Oval Office. And it seemed like at one point she might actually get fired over this. And so to then have this vandalism case at the World War II memorial come across her desk, she followed a similar playbook of, you know, making social media posts about, you know, how outrageous this was and that somebody they'd caught red-handed and they were going to prosecute her to the fullest extent of the law. And then her prosecutors went into court and argued that this woman who'd been arrested, Melissa Farris, should basically be kept behind bars for the months or maybe a year it might take for her case to go to trial, which in a vandalism case would be something I've never heard. I mean, it's so rare for such a case to be prosecuted as a felony, but for somebody to be held behind bars would just be something, I mean, I don't know if I've ever encountered in my career, but, you know, it's a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 type situation. So I suspect that's why, you know, both the substance of why they're trying to keep her in jail, but also why they're making a lot of noise around their efforts in this area.
So it's like there's this sort of willful effort that they must believe that this person who, you know, to my read, and I am, you know, not a trained and licensed mental health professional, does not appear to be a well person. To insist that this person, rather than being some rando, is like a person at the center of a nefarious scheme.
Well, it's interesting. So I watched some of the videos, both of these incident at the World War II Memorial and some other bizarre videos she's posted online. I mean, they're all bizarre. You know, the prosecutors seized on the fact that in the video about or videos about the World War II memorial thing, she says, I'm of a sound mind and I expect to be arrested for this and whatever. She's also ranting about some kind of whistleblower complaint and money in politics and a bunch of other things that are frankly very, very hard to follow. It strikes me, Michael, as if, if I went out on the 11th floor of an office building and stood on the ledge and said, I'm a completely sound mind and body and right. I intend, and I fully understand, what I'm doing and it's totally rational. I would expect the firemen to go up there and say, of course you are, and then to grab me and take me down from there as forcibly as possible. And that's sort of what I think is going on with her. Your protestations that you know and understand exactly what you're doing maybe aren't conclusive in this kind of a situation when you're spray painting weird sayings onto a tourist attraction and then dumping for totally unknown reasons. It looks like 2 containers of Dawn dish soap into the fountain.
Let me just ask you one practical question. My colleague, Emma Uber, she covers cops and courts, and she said, look, just about any time there is an arraignment, the defense wants the person released and the prosecution is saying, no, we can't do that. What was different here?
Well, I mean, so that's generally true, right? You got an adversarial system, and usually the prosecutors are looking for harsher treatment. I mean, the difference here, I think, is sort of the vehemence of the presentation and the fact that they filed this, when the judge initially rebuffed them, they then file like a 30-page document, which is like the kind of thing you would see in a terrorism case, explaining why they think that she's gonna, not show up for trial based on her record. And it just seems very performative. We can discuss further Pirro's broader record and how she's doing overall, because I think there's more to say in that area. But it is interesting that she and the office seem very willing to engage in these sorts of performative things that seem to me to have audience, maybe not of one, but of close to one in the Oval Office in order to carry on with, I think, other work that they're doing that they think maybe is of a broader positive benefit to the public.
I mean, it sort of gets to the essential weirdness of the office that Pirro holds, right? The U.S. Attorney in D.C. handles some of the highest profile cases in the country, but because D.C. has this weird constitutional status, the U.S. Attorney also prosecutes like nickel and dime purse snatchings and assaults, the stuff that a DA would do in a normal place. And it seems to me that these cases, the reflecting pool, alleged vandalism, the much more looking vandalism of this Melissa Farris case, it seems like these are where these 2 parts of the office come together. Trump has, in his presidency and his politics, has elevated a lot of like essentially nickel and dime DC crime stuff, like from murder stats to graffiti, into like national issues where he wants certain results. How does that make the job different for any U.S. attorney here?
Well, you've hit it on the head. I mean, that there is no other job I'm aware of for any prosecutor, federal or state level, that really is the same here as what she has to do in the district because of this weird hybrid where the U.S. attorney for the district prosecutes street crime, prosecutes ordinary arrests by the Metropolitan Police Department, but also prosecutes people accused of lying to Congress, also prosecutes terrorists that are brought in, alleged terrorists that are brought in from overseas, for having done things like, blow up the U.S. compound in Benghazi. Those things end up being prosecuted, maybe not always out of her office, but often out of her office. So it's just a starkly different situation. In another set of cases that were prosecuted out of that, largely with prosecutors from this office, are all the more than 1,000 cases related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which ranged in people from basically accused of trespassing or disorderly conduct to attempt to kill or maim police officers. So, any federal prosecutor's office would handle, say, some drug cases, along with corruption cases and things along those lines. But there would be none that handle the range of things here, which stretch not only down to, we should say, like some street crime is very serious, right? I mean, the number of murders there are in DC is an important thing, and to try to limit the number of murders in DC and prosecute them is not a trivial undertaking. But in addition to that, the office has to deal with people who committed all sorts of petty offenses. This woman, Miss Ferris, was cited just days before this vandalism incident for camping in a public park, which you would say, oh, that's trivial. Well, it is sort of trivial, except it's part of Trump's broader agenda that we need to, quote unquote, beautify the district. And one of his biggest complaints was he didn't like seeing all these homeless people in federal parks. And when he first came into office, he ordered those kinds of things to be cleaned up for cosmetic reasons. So even that, which seems trivial, it's trivial, but you can see the hand of the president of the United States in the background in a way that if the same thing went on in LA or Dallas or Boston, no one would think there was really a federal role in it.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like, the murder rate in Boston is obviously not trivial, certainly not to the victims and certainly not to Bostonians. But like, it's if they've got gripes about it, it's a gripe against the mayor of Boston, not the president of the country. One of the changes that, you just used these words that I've noticed, perhaps as a result of Trump's like real focus on local DC statistics, is Pirro is effectively, I mean, she released a video this week, Tuesday, where about these arrest warrants that have been issued for these cops who are accused of abusing the overtime system. And that's
a really interesting case. I did see that.
Yeah. And it was like, how dare you rip people up? I mean, it was basically stuff that your proverbial like camera hogging DA would do. And in DC, we never had that kind of U.S. attorney because they didn't answer to the voters. There was no upside to them in mugging for the cameras. Now there is, and as you put it, an audience of one.
Right. And this is something Pirro is cut out for, right? Having come from Fox News and being a television personality, and also having been sort of stewed in the New York media market in her earlier incarnation as a district attorney. So she knows how to have a press conference and how to hype things up from the media. I will say about that case, the total amount of money involved is not a huge amount of money. This is just to fill people in, a case alleging that I think a half dozen police officers and police supervisors in the MPD stole something on the order of, I think it's about $600,000 worth of money by lying about overtime and their work hours and so forth. You know what I thought was interesting about that? I saw in the press release that it was basically a joint investigation conducted by her office along with someone from the DC Attorney General's office, which I thought was fascinating because we've heard in the past that those two offices are at loggerheads, and Pirro is often out talking about street crime issues in DC and also talking about these teen takeovers and things along those lines. And I believe I'm not a local reporter, what one of the quote reforms she has proposed is that she wants jurisdiction over juvenile offenders who are currently prosecuted by, we do have a small scale prosecutor's office in DC called the Attorney General's office. Yep. But it doesn't really have the normal prosecutor responsibilities that an Attorney General's office has in a lot of other states. And one of the things it does do is handle juvenile cases. And she is looking to put her probably somewhat more aggressive, toughened, rough and ready prosecutors onto these juvenile cases. And as far as I know, it's something that the DC Attorney General's office has resisted. So to see them cooperating here, I think is interesting. And I will say, having seen her, in other press conferences, she had a very impassioned press conference. I don't know if you saw this one, Michael, a few months ago about abuses that had taken place at I think it's called the Psychiatric Institute of Washington, where people that are suffering from severe mental illness have been left in just outrageous conditions for extended period of time and caused some of them to basically die in that institution's custody. And while it was sort of an attention-grabbing press conference, she seemed genuinely disturbed by what had gone on and intent on, aggressively getting to the bottom of it. Again, in a way that, I think a relatively standard issue local prosecutor would be. So she has these two flavors. I think she really enjoys the process of putting bad guys behind bars, but she also, in this current job, understands that, or believes that, a key element in that is keeping on the president's good side. And so it requires sort of servicing some of these other things and making some of these offenses that I think are relatively petty sound much larger than they are, in order to keep in the good graces of the man in the Oval Office.
Let's talk about the DC SCU, your friendly neighborhood sustainable energy utility. 15 years and they're still here. Talk about eyes on the prize. Their mission possible. Serving residents with efficiency and clean energy programs, improving affordability and quality of life across all 8 wards. They've delivered $2.2 billion in lifetime savings for district residents and businesses alike. They've prevented 10.1 million metric tons of emissions right here. These are your neighbors working for you. And it makes sense that they're in Southeast by the ballpark, because they are knocking it out of the park daily. There is no ivory tower. They're on the sidewalks, out on the streets, and they're at your door, making it happen, more capable, more committed than ever. Doing right by you and you and you. I see you standing up. That's right, clap your hands, because DC SCU is 15 and still redefining power in the district. Find out more at dcscu.com.
So listen, you're one of the best sourced legal reporters in town, and I'm wondering what you're hearing from inside the office. This has been known historically as one of the best prosecutors' offices in the country. Ambitious young lawyers really work hard to try to get to a job there. But they have lately lost all these embarrassing cases. They couldn't even get a felony indictment against Sandwich Guy. Under Pirro, these heavily politicized, Trump-involved cases have been frequent embarrassments. What are you hearing from the staff in there? Are they demoralized? Are they able to do their job on normal stuff? What do you know?
Well, it's a bit hard to say, because, as you say, a lot of people who were upset about the way the office was managed. We should mention that when Trump first came into office, that Pirro was not the U.S. attorney. At that time, it was Ed Martin, who is someone that doesn't have much in the way of prosecutorial experience at all. And his presence caused, I would say, a near revolt within the office, because people really just viewed him as a completely political figure who was maybe not even competent to execute the day-to-day law enforcement stuff that has to be done in DC. I mean, there need to be line AUSAs to go in every morning and deal with the roster of people who were arrested the night before and figure out which of them, need to stay in jail and which cases should be dropped. That's street prosecutor kind of work that somebody has to do. And people in the office felt that Martin was just not competent to deal with that, and was also distracted by all kinds of other things, like his January 6th, grievances and many other highly political cases. So I think there was actually some relief when Pirro came in, that they were getting someone who actually was viewed, I think, in New York as a fairly successful prosecutor. She then had gone and taken this turn and gone into cable news, and had some incidents in cable news where she was sort of widely mocked. So there was a bit of trepidation about that. And, you always wonder, when someone's coming back for a second turn late in their career, are they up to the task, or is there some other motivation for that they're trying to relive their past glories? I've never gotten the sense at the press conferences I've gone to that she's not entirely on top of what the office is doing and what she wants to say at that press conference. And she's fairly maybe masterful is an exaggeration, but very competent at running these things and answering people's questions in a way that makes news. So I think from what I've heard from prosecutors, there's still maybe a bit of concern when she goes off on what are perceived as these political errands by the president. But I haven't heard sort of broad-based concern that the day-to-day work of the office is being neglected or mismanaged.
But they're losing these big cases.
Right. So well, are they big? I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, some of them big is
well, man,
like,
we're reporters, so big is what we say it is.
Right. Well, big is like, say you go after the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, right? And then a federal judge basically shuts down your investigation. That's a pretty big one. High profile ones, yes, there are these embarrassments. So it's like quite clear to everyone that there are cases that are being pursued that I think an ordinary apolitical prosecutor would not have any interest in pushing forward. And so people are disturbed by that, although we see that, frankly, Michael, happening in U.S. attorneys' offices around the country, that there are cases being pursued that seem very thin in some instances, if you think about like Letitia James or James Comey, but certain U.S. attorneys are willing to pursue them. And, some of them have had a lot of difficulty. I'm also thinking about out in Los Angeles with their prosecutions of people that were involved in anti-ICE protests. They tried to throw the book at a lot of people without a lot of discernment between who was really like a violent protester and who had engaged in some, minor trespassing or whatever. And they also were embarrassed in a lot of cases out there. So it's a phenomenon of the Trump administration, I think, that they come out of the gate hot and heavy in these cases that are high profile. And sometimes the rubber meets the road later on, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I'm hearing sort of mixed reviews. The thing I was going to add about the personnel is it's still complicated because you have people still in the office that were demoted as a result of January 6th from dealing with very sort of high-level political corruption cases at DOJ headquarters, or some of the most serious cases growing out of January 6th of assaults on police officers who were sort of sent back to prosecuting misdemeanors in the U.S. Attorney's Office out of a form of punishment or discipline, in my view. And so some of those people are still around. Many of them have quit over the past year. Some people have been fired over the past year. So there's a degree of tumult in the office still that I don't think has ever completely settled from what happened, say, in the first 6, 7, or 8 months during the Martin tenure and the first couple months that Pirro was in the office.
So this brings us back to where Pirro stands. I mean, because the question is what this office does, whether they do it competently, but also what their choices are of what to do. As recently as I think last weekend, Trump was saying again, like, you'd have to be an idiot to think that what happened at the reflecting pool wasn't vandalism. Has her performative energy in the case of the World War II memorial vandalism alleged, has that sort of got her back in Trump's good graces as far as you know?
I think that it has probably helped. I mean, she went in and pled her case personally and tried to make the case that, like, look, we pushed on this as hard as we can. There was then a story, I believe, in the Wall Street Journal saying that the White House had made a presentation about how they should bring misdemeanor charges over the reflecting pool case anyway, despite what they had said in court, which I've seen no real indication that she's going to do. We should also just say, like, I don't even know if that's ever happened before in the history of the United States, like why anyone in the White House would be making a presentation to the Justice Department about why someone else should be prosecuted for a misdemeanor about anything is just utterly bizarre in the last, say, 3 decades I've been covering this kind of stuff. So that is just weird, but it's things that the White House is doing, which may well reflect that this is still what Trump is focused on. That said, I think she has also, through her public statements in the last week or two, tried to refocus him on the broader question of crime in the district and made the case to him that she's doing a good job pursuing that. Now, when I've talked to prosecutors and ex-prosecutors from the office, How much of that she deserves credit for, I think, is an open question. Obviously, when they started this crime crackdown, it also involved Trump trying to assert more control over the MPD. It involved Trump surging federal officials into the district. It involved Trump deploying National Guard who remain in the district and are now expected to remain in the district through the end of his term. And all those things probably play a role in decreases in crime, as does the organic environment, because crime does seem to be going down in most cities across the country. So that's probably part of it. But can she claim some credit for that? Probably. She seems to have toughened the office's practices in certain areas. For example, she likes to talk about the fact that there were large numbers of cases being basically rejected by her predecessors in the Biden administration, that the police department would bring cases every day where they'd arrested people and the AUSAs would just so-called no paper them, which basically means the person just gets released and the case goes away. They've really cut down on doing that, and they're trying to pursue cases against the people that the police department is arresting. I don't have enough insight to tell you how successful they're being at getting those cases to some kind of resolution that's successful for the prosecution, but they're pursuing them, which is a different way of handling it than was being done in the previous tenure. So I think there's some credit there that she deserves for some of the things that are going on. And she, as far as I can tell, is trying to make the case that that's the thing that Trump should focus on, that the stuff she's getting done for this very important, national jewel that he wants to turn DC into, or sees DC as, and that she's a key part of it. I think that's her diversion to try to stop Trump thinking about these things on the Mall that are very irritating to him and generate a lot of questions from national reporters.
It's kind of like the man wants to be mayor of Washington. Before I let you go, you mentioned the possibility that the Hearn case, the reflecting pool case, would come back. I mean, I would imagine a judge would toss it immediately based on everything that Pirro's office has said about the cause of the reflecting pool malfunction. But what literally would happen? What would be the process?
I mean, I guess they could refile a charge against anyone about something. I mean, including Hearn. There is still litigation going on over whether that case should be deemed to be dismissed with prejudice, which would make it, as far as I know, very hard to recharge Hearn. And there's three other more minor cases that are sort of tacked in behind that against other people. Or whether it's dismissed without prejudice, which would leave open the possibility of filing another case. But and I don't know, a judge might throw it out, although a lot of these things come down to factual issues. And as with so many of these prosecutions, Trump tries to encourage, they're the kind of thing that get a headline that is very satisfying to him, I guess, at the beginning, but you're just sort of delaying a bad headline down the road. The Sandwich Man case is sort of a good example of that. You're delaying a bad headline when a grand jury refuses to indict, or fine. So you go ahead and you take that case to trial, as they did with the Sandwich Man case. And, just think, Michael, are you really going to get a dozen jurors in the District of Columbia to agree that David Hearn should potentially do jail time for whatever he may or may not have done in the reflecting pool to pull up a piece of something that was already damaged? I mean, it's just, I can't conceive of 12 jurors sitting down and agreeing amongst themselves that this is a serious matter that we should return a guilty verdict on. So it just seems like you're buying some pain down the road, but this is sort of pretty standard for President Trump. I think we can identify numerous situations he's involved in where he looks to get a good headline that day or something he can paint as a victory, but then you get something down the road 3 months, 6 months, or a year later that basically nullifies everything that went before and is a bad headline. And he seems to take these deals on a regular basis.
Josh, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to do it, Michael.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.